Well, it's a very beautiful day here in the Berkshires. And what's so fun about this is the snow is falling, so it's like as if you're living in a little kaleidoscope. And I thought this would be a good time to do some filming, specifically that introduction, that very first episode that I'm going to do on my television series, which is called Lennox in the Gilded Age. Now, everything is getting, they did the big kickoff, the celebration of Lennox's 250th anniversary. But make no mistake about it, Lennox would not be on the map, nor would Lennox have any prestige in the current world had it not been for its place in society during the Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age and the experience of the Gilded Age in America has so much to do with the situation that we're in currently. Indeed, some of the same families are involved in some of these massive scandals that you've been reading about in the financial world and otherwise. Meanwhile, the Americans living out here on the range in Lennox as citizens of a supposedly very civilized town have to endure the indignity, high taxes, and very little returns for what we pay for. Now, in light of all of that, Lennox has gone on to maintain a very exclusive niche in the tourist industry because of Tanglewood, which was a Gilded Age estate that was turned over in 1945 and has become this wonderful music festival, which we're all so magnificently proud of. However, the story of the Gilded Age in Lennox and in America, for what it tells about the people and the choices the people have made, well, I think it's very significant. And I'm going to pause for a moment. Now, the people have really spoken. They have really made a statement in America that they're finished with false promises from either party. It's time to get things done. And here, I'm going to harken back a little bit to the Gilded Age. Now, at that point in time, everything was really going well here, extremely well, even for the townsfolk, because if you happen to be a landowner, the land that was selling for $5 an acre to make a hard go of it raising potatoes is now worth $2,000 to $20,000 an acre because it's where a palace will be raised. So the Gilded Age brings this tremendous influx, and some of the families live notoriously off of that very clever investment that their families made, and some that are continuing in their place in local society are doing really well. Now, when the Gilded Age came to a crushing halt as a result of personal income taxes, World War One, the stock market crash, and even prohibition, all of these things were a great thwart to society and the maintenance of the sort of homes that you had seen built here in Lennox based on land and nature. It all comes to a crashing halt. And the whole thing, the entire Gilded Age experience in Lennox, and all of that fun of those frolics in the mountains, lasted from about the time of 1880 to 1920. Those are 40 years, and that's it. But what are the remnants? What does the Gilded Age really stand for? Well, here in Lakes, we are so fortunate to have the home of Edith Wharton herself, that fine novelist who captured the spirit and feelings of the Gilded Age into finely crafted novels, many of which all take place in what she calls Old New York. And that sets up for some of these shocking changes that are going on in the novels, in society, and in the world. And some of these changes have a lot to do with sex. Okay, and so we can go back to the Gilded Age, and we can see that these ladies have decided, especially among the high society ladies, Alva Vanderbilt was one of the main movers and shakers of the suffragette movement. So it was a certainty that the ladies were going to get the right to vote. Now, with that right, also Margaret Sanger came into the picture here, and she started to talk about birth control. Now, this was going to change women's lives and make them much more liberated. And this was going to give them a certain power into the future, which they did not have during the Gilded Age. So you've got to understand these are princesses in a cage, a gilded cage, a place they couldn't get out of. Because of the saturation of wealth and the centering of wealth, sometimes amongst the female heirs, there was going to be a sort of change in the air. And so, what is lost with the Gilded Age and the prestige, say, of being a hot spot on the social circuit, you get something more for all of humanity, and that being the freedom. And indeed, I want to bring in here an allusion to somebody called Rosie the Riveter, a character that was drawn by our local artist Norman Rockwell, and she symbolizes the women, the strength of the women, to be able to do the work of the men and in support at the same time of the men and the country so we can have a victory in war. War is going to have a big deal to play in the story of the Gilded Age, and I do want to talk about the Second World War in some depth because that's a huge event which bursts onto the world as a result of so many things, and you can't discuss it, without a very in-depth look into the world as it existed prior to World War One and after. It really sets up a boundary line, and I think that should be the main theme on Lennox in the Gilded Age, and really focusing in on World War One and how it touched the lives of the local citizens and society here in Lennox. I have a really good story on that one. How pretty can you get? Here, the snow is falling down here. We're having a wonderful February 15th, by the way. And you can see how pretty the snowfall is here in the Berkshires. But Lennox in the Gilded Age, I promised that I did have a pretty good story about the famous, what they call in Wikipedia, the most married woman of her day. It was only her second marriage, but it was quite a scandalous marriage because, see, her husband wasn't dead. Her first husband wasn't dead. She was an heiress to the Bromo Seltzer fortune. Her name was Margaret Gwynn. And then she marries Alf. Wait, I get that wrong. Okay. But she is a very romantic character. Now, Margaret is the heiress to the Bromo Seltzer fortune. She marries a distinguished doctor. Their marriage does not result in any children. She takes a trip to London and pursues a divorce, a separation and divorce. Very shortly afterwards, another married man named Alfred Vanderbilt had done the same thing. Then Alfred and Margaret married two of the very highest people in society, doing that one thing you're never supposed to do. Let's get a divorce. It's the ugliest word in the language. But that marriage was a really happy marriage. It actually was a love match. And they had two beautiful children. You know, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt was known as quite a sportsman. And indeed, he was always looking to improve his place that he had in England. And it was called Homewood. It's a town in England. And if you go there is a pillar set up in his memory. Because, see, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt booked a passage on the Lusitania. He was traveling to search for dogs, I understand, for his estate. As you know, the Lusitania was hit by a German U-boat or submarine, and it sunk in 18 minutes. And a young woman came up to Alfred and said she was in a panic because she didn't have a life preserver. He gave her his life preserver. She went on to live, and he went down with the ship. A gentleman and a sportsman, leaving behind a very wealthy woman. Now, she went on to rent many of the beautiful estates in Lennox, including Bedford Hall and Shadowbrook, which was the largest private estate home in America at the time. But eventually she always wanted to build her own estate here in Lennox. She did. She bought George Westinghouse's Erskine Park. She had the home demolished and built a colonial revival home there for herself. And she called it Homewood in honor of her dead husband, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the gentleman on the Lusitania. Okay, good. Now, I wanted to connect a story. I'm not sure if this is always going to work or if this is going to be worthwhile, but I had mentioned that the most married woman in America, according to her Wikipedia article, Margaret Vanderbilt, had rented out Shadowbrook, and I do know that there is a photograph of the two lovely boys at Shadowbrook during their rental period there. Now the home is still standing, and I actually am very proud homeowner. I have a view of it from my backyard if you walk far enough and peer between the trees. Now, to go back to the story of this magnificent estate called Shadowbrook, it has a very interesting history in and of itself. So, I don't want to miss that story and connect it to the rental of this tragic widow, because, see, tragedy is the centerpiece of the magnificent estate. Now, it was a Morris Hunt building, a mixture of styles, a massive place on the top of a mountain. Now, this mountain has an interesting history in and of itself. Now, I want to get that snow falling, so I'm going to change the chair direction. Now, this mountain connects Lennox to the town of Stockbridge. And during the French and Indian Wars, the Stockbridge folk were safe because they had made peace, so to speak, with the Indians. Not so the folk in Lennox, as I had said earlier in another video. The Lennox folk abandoned the town of Lennox from fear of the Indians. Now that mountain, you just can go over it today, past Tanglewood, and you'll end up in this wonderful, this is so pretty. Look at that snow falling. I hope it's filmed. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the mountain. The mountain that separates the town of Lennox from Stockbridge. That mountain, which was once the hunting ground of our native inhabitants, the Indians, the Stockbridge Indians, sometimes called the Mohican Indians. Now, what is very intriguing to me about this mountain is a story that I heard of a priest that was being brought there. And as he passed by the estuary, which marks the entryway to the mountain, anybody who's been through that part of Lennox, he said, stop the car, I have to pray. Across from the estuary, you could see Kripalu. And that is the yoga site where they had a famous uprising, from all this harmonious peace and wonderment. All of a sudden, all these things came out about the corrupt nature of this supposed commune up on the mountain. And one night, one mistress found out about the other mistress, and they had it out in a big fight with furniture flying, and the harmony and peace was broken. But this place also has another story. There was a terrible fire that ripped through the building. A beautiful mansion. It probably started in the kitchens. But you see, these priests, these were seminarians on their way to become priests. They liked to live it harsh. They were Jesuits. So they opened up the windows and the air fed the fire, and it just took off. There was no way to put the fire out. It was between these two towns up on a mountain, and there the priests were stuck inside the building. Now some had escaped, and they could look up and see a priest. He was on fire. They said, Father John had no idea, and his recovery was so miserable, as many people thought he might have been better off having burnt to death. There were 5 priests that were burnt to death that evening. It definitely made the news. There was going to be another fire in Lennox, and another story of a woman this time who burned to death in front of all of the townsfolk in a building right in the heart of Lennox.